How's that for an entrance? Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. I'm afraid that concludes the Spanish portion of my presentation. I wish I could do more. There's nothing to sort of bring home the truths of American exceptionalism than when you come to a foreign country and realize you don't speak the language. It's something we don't do enough of in our schools, and I wish, as I say, I could speak to you in your native language. I'm sort of doubly challenged because I study American art, and so I didn't really have much cause for learning foreign languages, but that's perhaps a project for the future. It's good to be here. It's the first time I've been in Madrid. I realized I counted yesterday in 33 years, and the very first time I've been here at the Thyssen, so it's wonderful to have a chance to see your great collection and actually see the painting that I'm speaking about today. And I'd like to just thank my colleagues here for inviting me and the rest of us, Paloma, Alba, Esther, and everyone. It's been a pleasure to meet you in person, having done so over Zoom in the past few months. And I look forward to the rest of the presentations later this afternoon and tomorrow. We had, as you may know, a bit of drama with respect to the speaker's notes, so I'm going to try to deliver my talk using two sets of notes, and bear with me, please, we'll see how it goes. As the title here, you know what? Let me try. Since I'm reading from here, let's try this. Okay. I wonder if they make these for jet lag. I'm not sure. As the title here suggests, I'm going to be speaking today about your great painting by William Merritt Chase called Shinnecock Hills. But this is actually, in spite of that title, is that sharp for you? I guess there's nothing to be done. Okay. And nice and big, which is great. This is a tale of two paintings, actually, yours and mine, so to speak. Yours being the one on the right, of course, and mine, which is not technically mine, but I call it that since I work at Princeton. The small painting at the left. Although actually, Lenice Williams, on the walk home from the dinner last night, suggested that maybe the Thyssen should give to the speakers the paintings that they're talking about. And mine, as she noted, would fit in the suitcase. So I'm not sure if that will fly, but it's just a suggestion. So I'm going to talk about these two paintings, and in a way it's kind of a tale as well of two presentations, because the first part will be more formal, in spite of this introduction. I'm going to read something that I've actually just written a couple of months ago about the painting on the left, and then pivot to your painting here and speak a little bit more informally about that for the second half. So on the surface, you could say perhaps that these are similar in some ways. They're both 19th century American landscape paintings. But I hope to focus here more on the differences between them and to consider how they differently engage the fundamental project of landscape representation, which is at a very basic level the encounter of the human perceiver as situated particularly in a social and cultural time with, in this case, non-human as we construe it, because most of us consider humans nature, which is a mistake, but that the encounter of the human perceiver with non-human nature. So that's where we're headed, and if I can sort through my notes here. We did not get the speaker function working, is that? Okay, I didn't know if we, yeah, no, okay. So this is the earliest American landscape painting at Princeton. It's both a significant and a curious work of art. Small and indistinct, it has the air of being hastily produced, which, as a sketch for a much larger painting, it probably was. Thomas Cole completed study for the course of Empire, the Savage State, in about 1834. It is the only known oil study for the initial work in the artist The Course of Empire, a 5-part defeatist allegory of history, progress, and the nation-state, whose portentous title both suggests its intended contemporary import and anticipates its subsequent distinction in American art history. At the time of its completion, novelist James Fenimore Cooper considered The Course of Empire, quote, one of the noblest works of art that has ever been wrought, close quote, and its maker, quote, the highest genius this country has ever produced, close quote. Hence, as the emergent expression of Cole's grand opus, the significance, historically at least, of Princeton's small one. The painting's curiosity resides in its portrayal, unlike virtually all the American landscape paintings that preceded it, of a wholly invented terrain, the depiction not of a particular physical place, but of a mental space through which to engage a topic rather than a topography. Other landscapes at work here before Cole painted similarly generalized views, but these were at least nominally rooted in observed reality, however much they improved and otherwise departed from it, also for ideological reasons. Cole's setting for The Course of Empire, which portrayed the same invented site as it evolved over time from wilderness to metropolis and back again, was instead wholly the product of his imagination, deployed to make a point about time, human nature, and nature itself. The message seems clear. The one, humanity, advances at the expense of the other, the natural world, but in the end, only nature endures. Cole's sketch was itself based on another earlier work by the artist, a wild scene of 1831-32. This amounts to a sort of dry run, or perhaps better, a false start, for the later Savage State. I'm so glad they're big up there. A wild scene was painted in Florence, where the tradition of invented landscapes with conceptual intentions was more established, notably through the work of Claude Lorrain, a French artist who lived in Italy, and Salvatore Rosa, active there at the same time, both of whom Cole admired. It is aptly titled, Thunderous skies, crashing waterfalls, and blasted trees conjure a primordial world in which half a dozen fur-clad men, sort of visible, armed with spears and bows, pursue a leaping stag. In the distance, other humans are just discernible on foot and in canoes, apparently come to join the chase, and beyond them wisps of rising smoke suggest a settlement. Despite the human presence, it is a dark and inhospitable environment, aqueous and craggy, affording scant purchase for its inhabitants. And for all the depicted motion, it is also strangely static. The poses of the hunters fixed and statuesque, the compositions pronounced verticals, hunters, let's see if I can get the pointer, hunters, trees, and the paired waterfalls, and blasted trees conjure a primordial, we've done that just, and for all its depicted motion, it is also strangely static. The poses of the hunters fixed and statuesque, the compositions pronounced verticals, hunters, trees, paired cataracts, combining at right angles with the pervasive horizontal of the water to fasten image to canvas as if to a grid. In deciding to set this scene of compositional stasis aside, first in Princeton's study and then in the completed Savage State, Cole signaled a desire for a more movemented effect, one specifically oriented to imply a progression from left to right. This he accomplished in both sketch and final canvas through the removal of the rightmost hunter, and you can actually see Pentimenti, maybe not on this slide, in the larger version, which is, of course, the one at right. You can see that hunter, which he's painted out, whose opposing stance impeded such an effect, and by generally orchestrating landscape, atmospheric, and narrative elements to suggest, like words on a page, a kind of rightward progression. Why? Because perhaps in doing so, he could more meaningfully relate this initial work to the other scenes in the series and indicate to viewers of the whole that a narrative is intended. The other compositions support this, each being structured in terms of implied motion according to their relative place in the overall program. In the second and third scenes, the Arcadian or pastoral state on the left and the consummation of empire on the right, viewers are presented with different manifestations of compositional and narrative equipoise. In the pastoral iteration, humans coexist peaceably with nature, though as the plowman at left and cut stump at right suggest, they have begun to alter it for their own ends. In the grand consummation, larger than the others, grand consummation at right, larger than the others in the series and intended as its centerpiece, and it's a bit larger on the screen appropriately, humans have assumed a corresponding centrality, erecting an imperial marble city on the once unoccupied spot. In each painting, a sense of stasis prevails, imparted by the great rooted trees of pastoral and the profusion of weighty columnar architecture in consummation, lending to each the same fixity as wild scene. Yet unlike in that abandoned prototype, here it makes sense. In the prevailing logic of anthropocentrism, time and human development are figured in course of empire as passing quickly to the right in the earlier painting, through their beginning stages, and then, when people predominate and nature appears to exist for them, as standing still. Only when things go awry, as in the series 4 scene, showing the destruction, as it's called, of human interests, is compositional movement renewed, but now backwards, against time and logic, with the painting's energies reversed and moving emphatically from right to left. When humans no longer prevail, the order of things is subverted. And it's worth considering that Indo-European eyes are used to orienting words and less consciously images from left to right. Text arranged in the opposite direction, as in numerous Asian systems of writing, is recognized as different to someone accustomed to a Germanic language like English. A similar reversal in the visual language of Western painting is also impactful, though more subtly and often not readily apprehended for the deviation it represents. Still, on some level, images composed like this read as organized against the grain, all the more so when it makes conceptual sense. Cole's stolid study for the second pastoral scene, when compared to Princeton's vibrant one for the first, reaffirms his wish to project fixedness in the series' middle pictures, just as the replacement in another preparatory work of an immobile lion statue for the striding headless gladiator in Desolation underscores his desire for backward movement in that picture. And as most of you know, the course of empire includes a fifth and final scene called Desolation, kind of a coda in which the ruins of the destroyed city are shown beneath a moonlit sky. It is unlikely Cole deliberately set out to portray these effects, although much has been made of whether he meant in Course of Empire to offer an environmental or ecological cautionary tale in addition to the socio-political one. His own words suggest he did not. And in any case, he appears to argue in the series for the significance only of human concerns, not those of everything else. As he wrote to his patron, Luman Reed, his critique was of history and the nation state. Quote, "My subject is drawn from the history of the past, wherein we see how nations have risen from the savage state to that of power and glory, and then fallen and become extinct," close quote. The irony is that in orienting his abiding natural setting fundamentally around the human, the artist conveyed his own anthropocentrism and that of the age, which was to instrumentalize American nature for its own ends with redounding and now cataclysmic results. What has been called directionality matters in understanding Cole, especially his most ambitious works. In the midst of creating Course of Empire, and actually on a recycled canvas originally intended for it, the artist painted his masterpiece, View from Mount Holyoke, Northampton, Massachusetts, after a thunderstorm, the Oxbow, as it's more commonly known, in which implied compositional movement also becomes significant. Indeed, it's central to the work's meaning. The lateral movement of the weather across that canvas draws not only sunshine, but also settlement with it, and the small painter nestled among the rocks, surely a self-portrait, approvingly paints the domesticated scene beneath him, not the wild nature at his back. In Course of Empire, Cole surfaces similar concerns more subtly, but the import of each is evident. His art reveals not a personal, countervailing indictment of human development at the expense of nature, as often claimed, but rather something more conventional and pervasive in Western culture, the enduring assumption of human primacy in the scheme of things. That it was over a preliminary drawing for consumption, in particular, that Cole painted the Oxbow seems telling, as thus the Course of Empire's most complete expression of human ascendancy became the artist's accommodating articulation of the process whereby such a transformation occurred. Many see Cole as an environmentalist avant la lettre. Certainly he was wary of unbridled development, having seen its effects his whole life, first in industrializing Northwest England, where he grew up, and later in his beloved Catskill Mountains, where he eventually established his studio. Yet although his writings evince a romantic's turmoil over the price of progress in Jacksonian America, his paintings are ambivalent with regard to the human-nature nexus, at first decrying the depredations of development, but ultimately accommodating it as a reality of the age. And not incidentally, I was very happy to see this for the first time yesterday. Here at the Thyssen, you have a work that you might similarly look at in terms of directionality. You have Expulsion, Moon, and Firelight, which partakes of that same rhetoric. You see how Cole uses directionality left to right, right to left to similar ends with the fallen, got the slide from Boston. This is the sort of finished painting at Boston. And you can see it's the expulsion from Eden. The two figures, Adam and Eve, leaving. They're not yet in the version you have here. But the painting, like Oxbow, like Destruction in the Course of Empire, moves against the grain from right to left, and time itself seems subverted with night at left and dawn at right. If one only imagines reversing the composition so that the Adam and Eve walk from right to left and day to night do the same, the painting is naturalized and loses much of its troubling import. Princeton's modest sketch helps set the course for Course of Empire, exchanging the stasis of wild scene for the movement of savage state, and thus critically informing the logic of the whole. Though its meaning depends on the rest of the series to be understood, the study helps make clear what the Course of Empire is expressing in environmental terms. This small picture underscores how landscape representation has always been essentially anthropocentric, and in this way, ideological. As American landscape painting developed over the succeeding years to express first the ordering logic of settler colonialism, and later the more ambitious rhetoric of imperial desire, its exemplars wove into their compositions something equally political and even more fundamental: attitudes about the human relationship to nature, which could not help but be pictured according to the subjective perceptions and concerns of their makers and contemporary audience. Okay, so enough about Cole. Let's get closer to home here and pivot to the painting in your collection, which was made at the other end of the same 19th century that saw the rise of Cole after the taming of the wilderness, to use a terribly anthropocentric phrase, after Manifest Destiny, after the closing of the frontier. I think if Cole's little painting was laden with meaning, Chase's seem to suggest the opposite. It's one of a series of many by the artist portraying a nondescript swatch of land somewhere in the sandy terrain near his summer home in Southampton, Long Island. There is no framing, unlike the pictures we've been looking at, to sort of direct your eye. We could be anywhere. It's almost as if he had taken a snippet from a panoramic view, and there's nothing in particular remarkable about this scene as against the scene that might be off to the left or the scene that might be off to the right. There are no people, there's no Sturm und Drang, there's no drama, there's no content. It's a painting seemingly about nothing. So if you're going to talk about something that is about nothing, you of course have to invoke Seinfeld, and both of whose main characters, by the way, Jerry and George, were from Long Island in the show. And Jerry now lives in Long Island, not far from where Chase painted his picture, and this is his modest home. What was remarkable about Seinfeld was that it famously eschewed evident plot and narrative structure, though of course it was actually very carefully constructed, focusing instead on the mundane, much like the painting that we've just been introduced to. And like the painting, it showed how the quotidian can in fact be interesting, complex, and I think with the painting, it evinces the beauty of what is usually overlooked. So I have a clip here, which I hope will work, which is the decisive moment when the show, within a show, about which Seinfeld was famously the first, About Nothing, was born. And it's particularly appropriate, as you'll see, for a Spanish audience.
So what's happening with the TV show? You come up with anything?
No, nothing.
Why don't they have salsa on the table?
What do you need salsa for?
Salsa is now the #1 condiment in America.
Do you know why? Because people like to say salsa. Excuse me, do you have any salsa? We need more salsa. Where's the salsa? No salsa.
Yeah, it must be impossible for a Spanish person to order salsa and not get salsa. I wanted salsa, not salsa.
Don't you know the difference between salsa and salsa? You have the salsa after the salsa.
This should be the show. This is the show.
What?
This. Just talk.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm really serious. I think that's a good idea.
Just talking? Well, what's the show about?
It's about nothing.
No story?
No, forget the story.
You gotta have a story.
Who says you gotta have a story?
Okay. So who says you got to have a story, George says. One might say similar things about a painting like this. There are many reasons why Chase might have produced such a painting, not least his desire to practice his art. As we'll see, the practice of art was why, in fact, he was there in the Shinnecock Hills. But I'd like to think a little bit about some of the environmental or ecological implications of making a painting like this at the end of the 19th century. But first, let's understand why Chase was in the Shinnecock Hills in the 1890s. He operated an art school there between 1891 and 1902, where before the place became as rich and fashionable as it is today, his well-to-do clientele actually in the school helped make it so, which turns out was part of the very point of the Shinnecock Hills Summer School of Art, as it was known. Oh, I should say that's a self-portrait of Chase and his home, and at the back of it was where he had his school. As so often in American history, art and commerce were there linked at the school, specifically by a woman named Jane Ralston Hoyt, a socially connected entrepreneur who, in collaboration with the Long Island Railroad, invited Chase to establish the school to promote the area's development and advance her own real estate interests. It's a tried and true strategy. Okay. I had, in another version of the PowerPoint, which I've got printed here, a painting just to suggest that linkage of commerce and railroads, and specifically with art, is something with a real history in 19th century American landscape painting. We have a great Bierstadt, and I know you have one here as well, of Mount Adams in what was then Oregon Territory, which Bierstadt tries to sell to Jay Cooke, who was controlled the Northern Pacific Railway at that point, which was the first northern transcontinental rail line. And Bierstadt wanted Cooke to use the painting to sort of market the appeal and allure of the Northwest. Cooke demurred, but the idea was there, and it's been done in other ways at other times with landscape painting. So that sort of linkage of art and commerce and railroads in particular is a tried and true one in what Hoyt and Chase were up to and later in the century. So Chase was out in the Shinnecock Hills, and he turned and painted his surroundings many, many times, dozens, if not scores of paintings of these environs. In most, there is in these works an implied human presence, even if no people are actually depicted. There's an interest in the suggestion of entrance into the space with the road on the top and the bottom, top left and the right on the path leading in, and the sort of human elements of the fences here and here, which not only suggest, of course, human presence because they made them, but also as vectors lead you into the painting. And in this painting up here, more traditionally, as far as American landscape painting goes, through this sort of overlapping of compositional forms, one across the other, which progressively lead you back into space. This was very much the language of American landscape painting, that the one on the upper right I just showed, or in an earlier period during the early mid to 19th century, when the picturesque, as it was known, an aesthetic developed at the end of the 18th century in England by William Gilpin and others for tourism in England and to sort of get English people moving through the landscape. That notion really accorded brilliantly with what Americans were doing, which was trying to get people into the continent, people meaning Euro-Americans, at this time of the politics and the imperatives of manifest destiny. So the carefully constructed compositions of the picturesque, its framing elements, you see clearly at left and right on both of these paintings, and stepwise recession into space via successively overlapping forms like on a stage set, and here they're just wonderfully evident, brought a sense of logic and control to the unruly, potentially overwhelming land, while at the same time suggesting bodily entry into the scene and thus its metaphorical occupation. And if it's not sort of evident enough how this was a political project, just look there, and I don't know that you can discern, but that figure sort of shown in the Durand moving into the landscape is actually attired in red, white, and blue, which is not sure if that was conscious on his part, but it's a wonderful touch. And here at the Thyssen, I just saw these for the first time as well last night, you have other typical works in this sense by Hudson River School mainstays in which the seeming impediments to pictorial entry, in this case you're sort of looking up and upstream, are overcome by the countervailing incline of the trees in both, by the distant mountain in the Durand, which actually is like the picture I just showed from Princeton, very similar effect. And the figure there in the Kensett, again, like the Durand at Princeton I just showed you. And Durand even gives you sort of a way around the fallen trees. I mean, if you just sort of imagined this tree propped across the other tree so that there's no way into that picture, the effect would be very different. And it's interesting in the catalog, the lovely catalog that you've done for the collection, that in the section, I think Palomi, you wrote it on nature, the sort of picked out detail on the facing page to the beginning of the essay is this very bit here. So that sort of pulls the reader in the same way that the viewer is pulled into this canvas, and then metaphorically in the same way that these paintings are all about getting people into this, into this untrammeled world. And this is just to show that it was not thus everywhere. It was in fact quite different abroad by this time. This is a recent catalog about John Constable. And just to suggest that by the time that Durand and Doughty and later Bierstadt and everyone else were painting these images, the European art had moved well beyond it or away from it. And the reason I think that we clung to the picturesque in this country or in the United States so long was that it really accorded with what we were interested in doing ideologically and politically, and it lost its purchase in more settled Europe by then. Chase, I think, is doing, as I showed earlier in the group of 3 slides, and here as well, something similar, but it's an important sense different. I think he's not so much interested in leading you into the painting and sort of directing you around in a very purposive way, but rather putting you inside the world that he's showing. I think there's less interest in that kind of penetration into deep space, and rather more an interest in a kind of placement within of the scenes that he's showing. And this is another painting from Princeton. The figures in his paintings, and many of them have figures, when they appear, they're not moving as they are in the other ones. They're not sort of moving into the scene. There's much of it as in it. And here they look almost as much like flowers or plants. It's a different paradigm from the Hudson River and how that human-nature nexus is constructed. So what can we say about this paradigm here? There is, as I noted, there's no particular focus. There's a valuation of the quotidian. Compositions are uncontained, as if they would sort of edge off the sides, with implicitly the world beyond them. And in this way, I think they're inherently ecumenical. It's a way of seeing that values everything, and not just the spectacular view or mountain or stream or river. What Chase offered in his Long Island pictures was something totally different from the alluring vistas of the Mid-Hudson River School, and something different certainly from the late canvases of that same school. And you think here of your Bierstadts and your churches and your Cropseys, with their dramatic skies, mighty rivers, and towering peaks. Chase gives us a quieter aesthetic of absence, a predilection for the non-subject, or the non-site, as Robert Smithson would famously call it years later. In so doing, Chase granted an important beneficial status to the mundane nature so often overlooked, disregarded, and thus unthinkingly developed and despoiled in the way Jane Hoyt had in mind. In repeatedly turning away from the allure of the adjacent shore and prioritizing instead the subtler blandishments of nature's less extraordinary spaces, Chase invited the viewer into his more familiar, comfortable scenes, but in a different way, by breaking down the human-non-human binary that so permeates the rhetoric of the beautiful and sublime as spectacular other. Again, the language of Bierstadt, Church, Cropsey, even though they, of course, in their own way, were seeking to champion nature. Chase thereby, if unwittingly, accomplished something environmentally, ecologically minded, an apprehension of nature in which human presence and perquisites are accommodated but not prioritized, and the inherent value of all things is appreciated. By painting nothing, then, Chase arguably came close to picturing everything. But before we let him too quickly off the hook, let's consider briefly, in closing, some of the other implications of these empty landscapes that Chase wants to show us in the Shinnecock Hills. He gave his daughter Hazel the middle name Neomog, which means between the waters in the Shinnecock language, and the Shinnecock people were the Native Americans that occupied the area prior to Jane Hoyt and everyone else. In a tribute to their neighbors, Chase gives her this name, and they lived, of course, in the land between the Atlantic Ocean and the Peconic Bay, so his name resonated with that particular place. But that apparent admiration didn't stop him from developing the same land. Here's a quote from a contemporary Shinnecock artist named Jeremy Dennis. Quote, "This land is situated on the Shinnecock people's ancestral territory, of which more than 4,422 acres was stolen through an illegal transaction in 1959. The school and Chase's stay on Long Island were devised by Mrs. Janet S. Hoyt, who proposed a summer development and employment opportunity for Chase with the end goal of developing a real estate venture and transforming the area into a summer resort destination. Despite the increased eagerness to settle in the Shinnecock Hills, the Shinnecock Indian Nation has remained vigilant in asserting their rightful title to their ancestral land." Close quote. Here is a picture of the so-called last of the Shinnecock Indians, which of course is one of the ways that Euro-Americans rationalize the occupation of lands that aren't theirs, is to suggest that these people no longer are there in any numbers. This picture would suggest otherwise, but the title beneath it is telling. And this is a great, this is from Trevor Noah's Daily Show a couple years ago. The Shinnecock, this is the Sunrise Highway, which is the main road that rich second homeowners going to the Hamptons from New York on their weekends take to get there. And the billboard has been the site of a lot of controversy. It's owned by and its content determined by the Shinnecock Nation, and they do have less overt criticisms of the fact that the land that these people are passing by is taken away from them. I just think Noah did a particularly good job of ironically or cynically showing the implications of that removal. So let's review, I guess, just in this last slide, you know, we've looked here this morning at who is often seen as the founder of American landscape painting, Cole, and who you might see as sort of the finisher in another sense, which is to say Chase, in the ways that landscape painting has shifted so much during the 19th century to have all of this ideology and all of this content, all of these politics removed from it in a sense, but I think Chase ultimately is saying something equally profound and maybe not intending to do so, but something from my perspective much more welcome, which is that we should see ourselves in nature as people, but we should also not just pay attention to the spectacular parts of nature and sort of ignore the rest and develop it or put you know, houses and factories everywhere, but to see all of it as having inherent value. And I think that's something that he does wonderfully in this and many other paintings. But thanks for your attention to mine.